Since the UFC's conception, there have been a total of 100 different unique fighters that have reached the status of an undisputed weight class champion. And in this video, we are going to be ranking every single one of them in the form of a tier list. Okay, so I have set a few objective criteria for myself for this tier list, which is going to be how many title defenses does each champion have, the quality of those title defenses, how, when, who, why, all that stuff they won the belt in the first place, as well as any asterisks that we get along the way. So that's the criteria I'm going to be using, just so you guys are aware as we go through the video. One other thing I want to point out is that each one of these tiers is like a spectrum, okay, so to speak. So just because we've got two fighters in a tier together does not mean they are equal. In any sense of the word, it just means that they did not meet the criteria to either get moved up a tier or down a tier or whatever it may be. Now, this video has taken me days to get to the point where I've even began recording. So listen, dude, if you appreciate this kind of content, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment down below, all that good stuff, especially if you want to see more videos like this that are a lot longer than my typical videos would be. Okay, I will try to make it not so long for you guys, but this is going to be a longer one. Now, without further ado, let's get into the first tier, which is the F tier spot. Okay, we are going to be going in order. I'm not just going to be randomly placing fighters in different tiers. We are going to start with F and work our way up. Let's get into it right now. All right, now we are going to start things off with some very easy decisions, okay? We're starting off light. These were the ones that were absolute no-brainers as to where they would go. So let us get started with the first fighter going into that F-tier class, and that is Carla Esparza, okay? And I don't know that I even need to justify this one. Now, Carla Esparza technically is a two-time strawweight champion. She won the inaugural championship fighting Rose Namajunas, won the belt again fighting Rose Namajunas in what was maybe the worst fight we have ever seen ever, but not either of those times was Carla Esparza able to put together a successful title defense. And like I said, that Rose fight, number 2, second fight, is the worst fight I have ever seen, and probably most of you have ever seen, and I don't know that I will ever forgive her for that fight. Also, you could argue that was a robbery decision. It's just that Rose Namajunas did so little that nobody cared even a little bit. So while I think that Rose Namajunas should have gotten the nod in that decision, neither of them really did anything, so I don't care. And to be quite honest, I'm glad to see a fighter do nothing get punished for it, okay? Now, like I said, we are starting off light, so let us get to the second fighter in the F-tier class, and that is going to be Nico Montano. Now, honestly, it's actually sad that Nico Montano is considered a UFC champion. It is pathetic. She won the inaugural champion fighting Roxanne Modafferi. If you are a somewhat hardcore MMA fan, you're going to know exactly who that is, and you realize how ridiculous that is, that that's a championship fight, right? Then it took her a while to even gather the courage to book a fight against Valentina Shevchenko, and she missed weight for that fight the day of, had to go to the hospital. Although, listen, dude, I don't necessarily, it's your job to make weight, okay? If you need to go to the hospital because you can't cut the weight properly, that's on you, and I'm glad that she got stripped because, like I said, she should have never been champion in the first place. And to be quite honest, she might have missed weight on purpose, because the things that Valentina Shevchenko would have done to her would have been just absolutely atrocious. Now, the next fighter going into that F-tier class is going to be Miesha Tate, okay? Again, I don't know that I even know that I need to justify these, but Miesha Tate had 0 title defenses. This is going to be a theme that we see throughout the majority of this F-tier class, okay? She strangled Holly Holm for the belt, and then she got strangled immediately after against Amanda Nunes in the first round. She was the champion for, I think, less than 3 months in total, okay? So that's why she has made it to this F-tier spot. Now, the next fighter to sadly get put into the F-tier slot. Listen, dude, this is nothing personal, okay? And I'm not just doing it because they are women. The theme of this F tier is that they have no title defenses, as I spoke about with Miesha Tate. So that being said, the next person to go into this F tier class is going to be the current bantamweight champion, Juliana Pena, which, by the way, is actually, in my opinion, pathetic. That we have Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena fighting for a championship, okay? Juliana Pena closes her fucking eyes when she throws strikes. Not to mention, I thought she lost that most recent fight against Raquel Pennington, and I understand that she beat Amanda Nunes and all that shit, and good for her, okay? But listen, she got dominated in the rematch, and then has showed us, dude, I can't. Her technique's horrible. I'm gonna move on, otherwise I'm gonna get to rambling. So let's get on to her most recent, nemesis, or whatever you would call it. Raquel Pennington is also gonna be going into F class, much like Juliana Pena. Just absolutely horrible technique. Won the belt fighting Mayra Bueno Silva in what was an atrocious fight, horrible fight that I wish I could erase from my memory. Okay, and yes, I do think that she beat Juliana Pena, which would have technically given her a title defense, but I just don't care. It's almost like the Rose Carla fight, where both of you guys did so poorly that I just want it to be over, and I don't care if the judges get it wrong. So let us move on to the next fighter in this F tier, pardon me, and that's going to be Germaine de Randamie. Now, Germaine de Randamie, kind of like Nico Montano, should have not ever been a UFC champion, and to be quite, I keep forgetting how horrible some of these earlier women's champions were. Okay, Randamie won the inaugural featherweight title against Holly Holm, a weight class that basically was non-existent, okay? But also, a fight that she should have lost, in my opinion. I thought she lost to Holly Holm. She also cheated blatantly twice, hit her after the bell, didn't get a point deducted or anything like that. So, I don't even think she should have gotten the belt to begin with, but then later she was stripped because she actually refused to fight Chris Cyborg. Now, at the very least, Nico Montano booked a fight with Valentina, right? Germaine de Randamie refused. She was literally terrified, and I don't necessarily blame her, but you can't do that as a fucking champion. Now let's move on to the next fighter to go into the F tier slot. I have a feeling a bunch of people that pretend to be hardcore fans and act like they absolutely love women's MMA are going to be upset by this one, but you know what, dude? I don't care. It's Chris Cyborg, and I think for good reason, okay? At the very least, her time in the UFC, I would put her in F tier. Now, if I was to take her MMA career as a whole, I would probably put her up a few spots, but I'm basing this solely off of what they've done in the UFC as a champion, okay? So yes, she defended a couple times, but she won the belt vacant at featherweight, fighting Tonya Evinger, right? This was booked after Germaine de Randamie refused to fight her and was stripped. Tonya Evinger was never in the UFC before this fight. They brought her in as a literal lamb for slaughter, okay? And then she went to a decision with Holly Holm in her next defense, or her first defense rather, and then her second defense was against Yana Kunitskaya, a woman who never in a million years should have ever been in a title fight, has never been championship material, will never be championship material, okay? So the first time she ended up fighting a chick that was actually on her level and still in her prime, in Amanda Nunes, she got destroyed in 51 seconds, and then she went on to lie about Dana White, made a fake video and all the rest of it, and got axed from the company, so we never got to see how she would do in a rematch. Now let's move on, okay, to the first male in this F tier slot, and I know that there's going to be people that are upset about this one, and you can let me know down in the comments below, okay? It is Aljamain Sterling, and I don't care if he defended the belt multiple times, okay? We're going to talk about it. He belongs here. Okay, he does, and I'm going to make my case. First of all, he did not win the belt. All right, he just didn't. It was a DQ, very unfortunate situation. Yes, it was Petr Yan's fault, but he didn't win the belt. He did nothing to get that belt other than be a good actor, okay? Then, the rematch, I thought he lost as well against Petr Yan, which counted as his first title defense, which is utter bullshit. I thought Petr Yan won the first round, which is the only swing round in that fight. And in my opinion, it was Petr Yan that should have gotten the nod. But either way, when we take a look at Aljamain Sterling's title defenses, they're just not that great. Okay, we have a Henry Cejudo who was inactive for 4 years. We have a TJ Dillashaw who had just came back after popping for steroids, knee surgery, double shoulder surgery, all the rest of it. Not the same guy that he was when he left, right? And in the fight had a shoulder that would not stay in its fucking socket. And then the only title defense he made that was against an active bantamweight contender, Sean O'Malley, which he complains about to this day about the turnaround time, saying it's 15 weeks of short notice, all the rest of it. We just watched Alex Pereira defend 3 times in roughly 30 weeks. You can't defend once in 15. Shut the fuck up, okay? 1. 2, he gets put down, doesn't he? Right? So he defends against some old dudes that were inactive. One of them also a robbery decision, in my opinion, and then loses to Sean O'Malley. So, also, he never won the belt to begin with. This is the perfect candidate for F tier, if we're being honest. Okay, now let us get to the next one. We can move on before the Aljo fans start get really upset. Eddie Alvarez. Okay, now Eddie Alvarez is a legend, and I'm not trying to be shitty or anything like that, but he won the belt off RDA. He lost it immediately to Conor, and what was an embarrassing performance. I have no idea why he decided to strike with Conor McGregor, but he did. And the result was fantastic if you're Conor, and utter embarrassment if you are Eddie Alvarez. Okay, that's why he is in F tier. Not a single title defense, got finished brutally in his first title defense against a featherweight at the time. Now, next up to be put into that F tier spot is going to be one that I bet you, if you're a newer UFC fan, you probably have no idea who he is whatsoever, but that is Carlos Newton. Okay, now, Carlos Newton impressively, in my opinion, beat Pat Miletich with a submission as well. Okay, if you don't know who Pat Miletich is, you should look him up. If you are a younger fan, go back and watch his fights and things like that. But he lost the belt later that year to Matt Hughes via a slam KO. Very, no title defenses whatsoever, very short-lived, but still, in my opinion, the fact that he dethroned Pat Miletich, who set a precedence for welterweight moving forward, was at the time extremely impressive. But either way, dude, let us get to the next one going into F tier, and that is a guy whose name I'm not even quite sure how to pronounce, David Mene or David Mean or something along those lines. I bet most of you have not heard of him either, okay? First ever UFC middleweight champion in 2001, fighting Castillo, okay, for like 5 fucking months. And then he got TKO'd by Bustamante, Murilo Bustamante. But hey, man, what can you do? First ever UFC middleweight champion. Still something to be proud of. All right, moving on to the next fighter, and that is going to be another guy most of you have probably not heard of, Evan Tanner, okay? Evan Tanner won the middleweight title, which was vacant at the time, fighting David Terrell. He also beat Robbie Lawler right before that in order to get that title opportunity. That was the Eliminator fight right before that, which I thought was fairly noteworthy. But then he got finished in his next fight versus Rich Franklin, and he went on a pretty bad skid after that. Now, these next few might upset a number of fans, okay, but I don't really care. We are being objective here, like I spoke about in the beginning. So the next one to go into that F tier slot is going to be Luke Rockhold, okay? Now, he won the belt pretty impressively off of Chris Weidman, who is actually, a pretty long reigning champion as far as middleweight goes, and he won it decisively as well, right? But then he got knocked the fuck out by Michael Bisping. 0 title defenses, and he only won a single fight after that against David fucking Branch, okay? Let's move on to actually the guy that removed him, dethroned him, Michael Bisping. I know, Brits, it's okay. You can calm down. Michael Bisping is not a good champion, okay? He just wasn't. He wins the belt on short notice against Luke Rockhold, which was obviously a good feat, right? Like, he knocked him out. He wasn't supposed to. Big underdog, off the couch or on vacation, whatever it was. All the rest of it. Very cool. But then he goes on to defend against Dan Henderson, who at the time was ranked number 13. And I mean, listen, dude, people were upset that Khalil Roundtree was getting a title shot, for fuck's sakes, right? Ranked number 8. But either way, Bisping's face got completely rearranged in that fight. But he ends up, coming out the other side victorious, only to get submitted and put to sleep by George St. Pierre. And also, people forget, man. People forget this little tidbit, okay? Michael Bisping kind of held up the middleweight division for a while, which caused some shit, with Robert Whittaker and Yoel and all these guys. He didn't really want to fight the contenders. He wanted to fight George St. Pierre and essentially leave. He went on to get knocked out by Calvin Gastelum right after that. But either way, next up in F tier, a guy who Michael Bisping absolutely fucking despises, Vitor Belfort. TRT Vitor, baby. Okay, now, Vitor's title reign was essentially non-existent. He wins the light heavyweight belt in 2004 against Randy Couture via doctor stoppage. Then he loses it to Randy in his very next fight via doctor stoppage. No title reign whatsoever for Vitor Belfort. I know a lot of people, a lot of MMA fans love Vitor, but his title reign just was not all that, okay? Now, these next 3 I think are a perfect example or a perfect display of me being unbiased here. Okay, it hurt me to put these next few in this category because of the amount of nostalgia that these guys create. Watching their title fights back when I was a kid, being able to remember still today, even though it was like 17 years ago, exactly where I was, who I was with, and all the rest of it, watching their fights. But either way, dude, next up for F tier is Forrest Griffin. Okay, I know, dude, it bothered me to do it as well. Now, I understand most UFC fans love Forrest Griffin. He gave us a ton of incredible fights. Like I said, I remember where I was exactly, who I was with, watching him fight Rampage Jackson, watching him fight Anderson Silva, watching him fight Stephen Bonner, and all the rest of it. But his title reign was basically non-existent, okay? Basically non-existent. He got finished to lose it against Rashad Evans, only had it for like a few months, right? He won it off of Rampage Jackson via decision and then got knocked out by Rashad Evans very shortly thereafter. So it's unfortunate. And speaking of, dude, the next fighter for F tier is gonna also be Rashad Evans. This was at a time when light heavyweight was like, they were playing hot tomato with the belt, and it was fucking fantastic. Basically all the way up until Jon Jones showed up, okay? No successful title defenses for Rashad, and got finished for the belt, and quite brutally, okay? Quite brutally. He's become a meme because of it. But such a good time to be a fan, especially watching the light heavyweight division of the UFC. And next up for the F tier is going to be Shogun Rua, another guy from that era, dude. I apologize, okay? Listen, don't be mad at me. The era of hot tomato with the light heavyweight belt, like I said, wins the belt off Lyoto in 2011, and unfortunately just a few months later has to fight Jon Jones. Shogun was the last man to hold that hot tomato belt, and then, you know what happened when Jon Jones showed up. So that was all the rest of it. That was the end of the good days of good old light heavyweight, okay? If you are a younger fan and you're not quite sure why some older fans like really talk highly about these dudes, I would suggest going back and watching their fights from Pride and things like that, because a lot of these guys got to the UFC maybe a little bit older, not necessarily doing their best work. But either way, if you have Fight Pass, you should be able to go check out all their Pride fights as well. Now we got a few more modern day champions coming up next, okay? Let's get to it. Glover Teixeira, okay? I understand he's not really modern. He's an old man, and he's essentially retired, but he won the belt at 42 years of age, and it wasn't all that long ago, right? Wins it off of Jan Blachowicz, who's one of my favorite fighters, by the way, just a few days after his 42nd birthday, which is absolutely insane. He won it dominantly as well. He finished Jan Blachowicz in the second round. The only problem is in his first title defense, he was very close to successfully defending, in my opinion. I thought he was on his way to beat Yuri Prohaska, at least if it went to the scorecards. But then he got exhausted, got caught in a choke, and had to tap, okay? And speaking of, Yuri Prohaska's next in F tier. I understand Yuri's got a ton of fans. I'm a fan of Yuri, okay? But that does not change the fact that his title reign was essentially nil, okay? He wins it off of Glover Teixeira. They are scheduled for a rematch. He gets injured and unfortunately has to vacate. Right. Then when he comes back, he gets a shot at the title immediately, which I agree with because he had not lost the belt previous, but he shit the bed in that one and then shit the bed in his next title opportunity. After that, even harder, right? Got brutally finished by Alex Pereira in both of those. The only difference is he's not as salty. Now, speaking of another man to get knocked out by Alex Pereira, Jamal Hill. He is salty, okay? Jamal Salty Dreams Hill. I mean, listen, dude. He won the belt when it was vacant, which is not inherently a bad thing, right? It's not necessarily bad, especially depending on who you beat. He was fighting Glover, who was just coming off that war with Yuri. And, it was a great performance. I'll give it to him. But he didn't beat the actual champion at the time, whereas Yuri Prohaska did. So I even put Yuri Prohaska slightly above Jamal Hill here. But, like Yuri, he gets injured, has to vacate the belt, and upon his return gets the same opportunity Yuri got and got KO'd. Much the same as Yuri Prohaska, okay? Now, I apologize for this next one. Like a bunch of these guys, dude, I'm just trying to keep things objective, okay? I respect the fuck out of this man, but with that being said, his title reign was F tier, okay? Mark the Hammer Coleman. I know, dude, chill. It's okay. The first ever UFC heavyweight champion, Mark the Hammer Coleman, submitted Dan Severn with a scarf hold in 1997. Unfortunately, he lost his belt later that year to Maurice Smith. Now, Like I pointed out, I respect the fuck out of, especially all the fire shit that we've seen recently. Him, going in to rescue his dog or like all his parents. It was right. The dog unfortunately passed. I mean, this dude is an absolute stud, and most UFC fans love Mark Coleman. I'm not trying to shit on these guys by putting them in F tier. We're just being objective, okay? Anyways, let's move on to the next one in F tier. Cody Garbrandt. Okay, they're getting shorter as I go along. I'm not sure why, but Cody Garbrandt, okay? Listen, if you watched his fight with Dominic Cruz, you would have never expected to see what we saw after that, right? That was such a good performance against a guy who had basically been able to beat everybody at that division. But then he loses against TJ Dillashaw pretty brutally in his first title defense, right? He gets finished in the second round, gets tagged with a beautiful head kick. Although he did almost get him out of there in round number 1. But in the second fight with TJ, the rematch where he was now trying to regain his title, he gets finished easier than the first time. And ever since then, he's only been able to beat nobodies, who most of them are not even in the UFC anymore. And also, he's getting weird fucking face tattoos. I don't understand it, bro. I feel bad for Cody Garbrandt. I hope he's okay. And I hope that we get to a time where laser tattoo... Listen, dude, I am covered in tattoos. Some face tattoos I don't even mind. That one is fucking ridiculous, okay? But either way, let's move on to another absolute legend who I am by no means trying to disrespect by putting him in this category, but it's Boss Rutten, okay? Boss Turkey Arm Rutten, okay? Won the heavyweight belt in 99 against Kevin Randleman. Split decision. Unfortunately, he had to vacate due to injury. He didn't even get a chance to defend his belt. He never fought in the UFC again after that. I don't even think he fought many times after that. Anyways, we know the issues Boss Rutten has had with injuries, right? He's got the pinched nerve and atrophy in the arm and all the rest of it. Not great for a guy trying to fight. Do you know what I mean? So, like I said, by no means am I trying to be disrespectful by putting him in F tier. Next up for F tier is the youngest heavyweight champion in history, Josh Barnett. Okay, now Josh Barnett beat Randy Couture via TKO to get his championship. Now, the crazy thing about Barnett's story is, keep in mind, this is in 2002, okay? And he got stripped due to a failed drug test. That is almost unheard of, okay? It was so hard. It was not past tense. So hard to pop for steroids at that time, in that era. It was like, most guys were just on shit, and we very rarely hear of guys getting stripped because of it. So that is absolutely insane to me. But because he was stripped due to a failed roid test, obviously no title defenses whatsoever. Now moving on to a guy that probably most of you have not ever heard of, Rico Rodriguez. Okay, he won the vacant belt fighting Randy Couture in 2002, and then he lost it in his very next fight against Tim Sylvia by stoppage. Okay, so back then, dude, it was actually so much fun. I like seeing a dominant champion every once in a while. It's cool to see somebody accomplish something great. But back in the day, so many belts would change hands so often. It was crazy. It was nonstop. You never knew who was going to win on any given night, pardon me. Okay, and speaking of a guy who only held the belt for basically one fight, Fabricio Verdum. No title defenses either, okay? Fabricio Verdum is so good, dude. He's got a very underrated resume, and I felt bad putting him in F tier just because, based off of everything I know that he's done, right? He submitted Fedor. He submitted Cain Velasquez to win the belt, which is just fucking incredible, like, in and of itself. But he got knocked out in his very first title defense against Stipe Miocic. And if we are looking at how they were as a UFC champion, I have to, put him in F tier accordingly, okay? Now, moving on, we've only got 5 more people for F tier, and then we can move on to D tier. Now, this next one might have been a little bit of bias on my part, but I'm going to be honest, dude. He meets the criteria for F tier. The vast majority of these fighters have 0 title defenses, and so does Matt Serra, okay? And yes, I'm Canadian, and yes, he knocked out George St. Pierre. I do care, but that's not why I put him in this tier, I promise you, okay? The reason is because he lost the belt immediately after to George and got fucking destroyed in the process, right? And in the time that he defended that one single time against George St. Pierre, that was his third fight. He went and won 2 other fights to get the rematch against Matt Serra and absolutely destroyed him. And Matt Serra never was anywhere close to gold. Again, the guy went 11-7 throughout his career. He should have never been a champion in the first place, but George St. Pierre shit the bed. And listen, dude, sometimes it's the ones you least expect to give you trouble, which is kind of like this next person, Holly Holm. Okay, now if you were somebody that pays attention to striking, right, or no striking at all, you knew that could have been the outcome when she knocked out Ronda Rousey. But unfortunately, Holly could not defend the belt. She got submitted by Miesha Tate in her first title defense, and she's been super inconsistent ever since. I will just say, though, that head kick of Ronda, the way she finished her was so satisfying to watch, and just it made it it was so hilarious because you just have Ronda's coach screaming about head movement. Ronda's coach had convinced her, because she got 1 KO stoppage towards the end of her title reign, that she could stand with these girls that were high-level strikers, at least relative to the women's divisions, and it was a very silly thing to do on her coach's part. So it was just kind of funny seeing that all play out the way that it did. Either way, moving on to another bantamweight champion, and that is Alexa Grasso. I'm going to run out of space here. Good thing we've only got 2 more people, okay? Now, this might be a bit of a hot take because she did beat Valentina, and it took Valentina 2 more tries to actually beat her, right, for the belt and whatever. But listen, I don't want to say she got lucky in that first fight because it wasn't luck. She trained for the moment. She knew that Valentina would spin. She knew she would wait for her to be close to the fence and she would take her back and all the rest of it, right? But we did kind of see, even in that fight, in the following fights, that the person who won the vast majority of the rounds was Valentina Shevchenko. I think Valentina Shevchenko was the better fighter. And also, there's a lot of people that think that Valentina kind of got robbed in the first fight, or the second fight rather, anyways, that was scored a draw. So it's not even like Alexa won the second fight. They're 1-1-1. But if you look at the totality of those fights, I think it's pretty clear who wins more rounds. Although the third fight was pretty boring on Valentina's part, I will give her all of that. But I don't know that we see Alexa Grasso become champion again. Now let us get to the last 2 people in F tier. Next up for F tier, Jessica Andrade. Okay, very short-lived title reign. She slams Rose Namajunas, which, by the way, that was, it wasn't even skill or anything like that. It was pure strength on behalf of Jessica Andrade, and also pure absolute retardation on behalf of Rose Namajunas not letting go of that Kimura grip. So while I'm not going to fault Andrade for Rose's mistake, I'm not going to say that she shouldn't be champion or anything like that. It's just that we know, Jessica is not the most skilled individual. She has not had the best time of things lately. She's basically got an overhand right, and Rose basically handed her, I just said basically 3 fucking times, I apologize for that, handed her that belt. Either way, the last person in this F tier, so we can get to D tier and move this video along, is Frank Mir. Okay, many people might be upset about this one, but either way, he wins, right, against Tim Sylvia, which, if you've not seen that, I recommend you go watch it. I don't know that I can play it on YouTube without getting demonetized due to violence, because it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. But, unfortunately, he got stripped shortly thereafter due to an injury, and also it was the vacant title, so Tim Sylvia wasn't even the champion at the time, so he didn't take it off the champion and was unable to defend it. Not necessarily his fault, but, I'm glad that we saw him fight Tim Sylvia, because that armbar was just something to behold. All right, now let us move on to D tier finally. This video is going to be very long, and I apologize for it, but either way, let's get to it. All right, now I'm going to try and get through this D tier a little bit quicker than the F tier, just to make this video not so long, as it will be a long one, but I just want to make sure I include context for each of them. Now, the first fighter to christen the D tier category is going to be Rose Namajunas. Okay, she couldn't really put together a successful title reign at all. I think in large part due to her groomer boyfriend, but that is a different video entirely. Okay, she KO'd the long reigning champ Joanna Jędrzejczyk, which was very impressive and not expected at all, and then beat her again in a rematch. It was a closer decision that time. And then she got KO'd rather by Jessica Andrade, that we spoke about a little earlier. she eventually got another chance at the title against Zhang Weili and head kicked her, and an amazing, beautiful head kick, and then beat her again in a split decision, which could have been, it could have gone the other way. It was a little bit iffy. But the reason I put her lower is because of the Carla Esparza fight. While she is a two-time champion and defended technically against Joanna and defended against Zhang Weili, the Carla Esparza fight, much like Carla Esparza, I will never forgive her for, okay? Either way, let's move on to the next fighter in D tier. And that is going to be Davidson Figueiredo. Okay, now Figgy is a very good fighter, and he could be successful up at bantamweight, where we've yet to see. He beat Cody Garbrandt, and he beat Chito Vera as well. But, you know, the fights are only going to get harder from there. But he could not put together a championship streak. All of his fights as a champion were against Brandon Moreno, right? He draws with him, and then he gets finished by him. And then he beats Moreno in the trilogy. But then he gets finished again via doctor stoppage in the quadrilogy, which it wasn't like an eye poke or something like that. His eye swelled up from a punch. It was unfortunate, but still got finished. So no real successful title defenses technically, right? Because the first one was a draw, which is considered retaining your title. But still, he did have very fun fights with Brandon Moreno. And speaking of Brandon Moreno, he's going to be next for D tier. Okay. Again, much like Figueiredo, he could not put a good streak together. You just heard some of it, but after he won that fourth fight, he would lose in his very next title fight, which was against Pantoja. It was a very close fight, but still, the only guy he had successful title fights against was Figueiredo. No real title reign at all. And the next in D tier is a bantamweight champion that if you are a newer fan, you might not even be aware of, is Renan Barão. Okay. Now, Renan Barão was like the original Tom Aspinall, okay? So I feel for him, in a sense. He defended his interim title fucking twice before he eventually got promoted, which is just ridiculous, dude. We should not be seeing guys defend interim titles, okay? But either way. And then he defended that undisputed title against Uriah Faber, which is meh, you know. Uriah Faber basically got beat by every fucking champion at this weight class. And then he lost it to TJ after that. So really only one title defense, and unfortunately never actually unified the title because he didn't get a chance to, because he was too busy defending his interim title. Okay, now let's move on to the next fighter at D tier, which is Petr Yan. Now I would imagine there's going to be two different kinds of fan bases upset with me. I will just point out I am a big Petr Yan fan, and maybe it was bias of me to put him in the D tier category. Meanwhile, Aljo sits firmly in F tier. Okay, so the people that are going to be upset at me are the ones that think he should have been ranked below Aljamain Sterling, as well as the Yan fans that think he should be ranked higher because he gave us very fun fights. Okay, but he won the title off of Jose Aldo. It was vacant. Jose Aldo was not the champion at bantamweight. Not to mention, Jose Aldo was coming off of a loss to Marlon Moraes, officially at the very least, right? Because I thought he won against Marlon Moraes, which is why he got a title opportunity. I mean, Petr Yan did beat the absolute piss out of Jose Aldo, one of the worst stoppages we've ever seen. But he lost it in his first title defense. We all know how he was beating the piss out of Aljo and then fucked up and kneed him while he was grounded. And again, I thought Petr Yan won the rematch. So who knows what would have happened had he not kneed Aljamain Sterling in the head. But technically no title defenses, and he won it off of a vacant champion. He could, you know, honestly be an F tier, but fuck all that. Moving on to the next fighter at D tier, and that is Sean O'Malley. Okay. Now, Sean O'Malley knocked out Aljo, which I was very happy to see. He defended one time against Marlon Chito Vera, which is, I mean, come on, man. I get the storyline or whatever, but it's not a good title defense at all. Chito should not have been fighting for the title, period, right? And then in his first title defense against the actual contender in Merab, he loses. Okay, so it is what it is. Now, speaking of, the next fighter in D tier is Merab Dvalishvili. Now, I know there's going to be people that are upset about this, but the reason he's here is only because he has yet to defend his title, right? Merab is a new champion, and there's a few of these scattered throughout that I will point out as we go along. Merab, you know, if he was to go and defend his title, depending on who it's against, maybe I would move him up or whatever. But if he's unable to defend, he could be an F-tier champion, right? If he has 0 successful title defenses. It was just that I felt wrong putting a guy that hasn't had a chance to defend yet in F-tier. So, but I couldn't put him any higher basically for that exact same reason. So, either way, dude, we are going to continue. Now, these next few, we are getting into some OG territory. So, you know, you might not know who they are if you're a younger fan or even a newer fan. But I would strongly suggest you look into some of these people. So the next person for the D tier is going to be Jens Pulver. Now, like I said, I would imagine a bunch of you have no idea who he is, unless you paid attention when they did his Hall of Fame moment and things like that. They showed him. He streams on Twitch for the UFC right now, if I'm not mistaken. But he was the first ever lightweight champion in the UFC. He defended it twice, and one of them was against BJ Penn. And I know that a bunch of you guys are not gonna understand how good that is, especially at the time. BJ Penn was incredible. I understand that he had a horrible end to his career, and that's what most of you will have seen. But at the time, if you had a win over BJ Penn, like, you were the fucking man, okay? Now, it was a super close fight, but either way. And he eventually got stripped due to contract dispute, so he never even lost his belt. He just went on to fight in other organizations and things like that. Moving on to the next fighter at D tier, and that's going to be Sean Shirk. Okay, the next champion, rather. I should be saying that rather than fighter. Either way, won the vacant belt in his debut against Kenny Florian. He defended it a single time, and then he got destroyed by BJ Penn, and lost his belt. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of these guys, a lot of these older dudes will have at some point lost to BJ Penn. And there's nothing wrong with that, because he is not the BJ Penn that we saw at the end of his career. Moving on to the next champion in D tier. And that is going to be Anthony Pettis. Okay, now I know Anthony Pettis has given us some pretty cool moments. The Superman Punch KO over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Of course, the Showtime kick against Benson Henderson and all that. But in the UFC, he had one successful defense after finishing Benson Henderson a second time. He submitted him this time for the belt. He defended it against Gilbert Melendez, and then he lost it there shortly after to Rafael dos Anjos, which, speaking of, is next for D tier. Rafael dos Anjos, okay? I love Rafael dos Anjos. He's an absolute OG. He's had, you know, he's been pretty damn successful across 2 weight classes. He's given us a ton of crazy fights. He's one of the only guys from that era that is still active. But much like Anthony Pettis, he only had one successful title defense against Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and then he lost it shortly thereafter to Eddie Alvarez, who was an F-tier champion, not a single title defense, and was embarrassingly beaten by Conor McGregor. Moving on, Johnny Hendricks in D tier. Okay, now I understand a lot of people think Johnny Hendricks beat George St. Pierre, and I get it, dude. Okay, I hear you, but I will point out he was absolutely roided the fuck out, and George St. Pierre wanted extra testing that Johnny Hendricks refused to do. Now, I don't blame Johnny Hendricks for refusing the extra testing, although I do believe George St. Pierre offered to pay for it. And I know there's a lot of people that think George St. Pierre was on shit, but at least if we listen to him, the reason he wanted to leave the sport for, I'm gonna go away for a little bit after the Johnny Hendricks fight, was because he wanted to wait until they had legitimate drug testing. He wanted to do drug testing through WADA with Johnny Hendricks. Didn't happen, obviously. And look, dude, when USADA showed up, we saw Johnny Hendricks absolutely fucking melt. So I think that George St. Pierre was a little bit, vindicated in that sense. Moving on to another fighter that most of you will have never heard of. Pardon me, a champion, okay? Mario Bustamante. Okay, I guarantee most of you have not heard of him. And that's okay, dude. Okay, that's okay. He won the belt in 2002. Defended it one time. Went on to fight in Pride against absolute fucking legends. Now, he never lost the belt. He got stripped because he decided to sign with Pride at the time, which, by the way, that is something that was not necessarily unheard of. Like, we saw a lot of guys bouncing back and forth between those two organizations and even other organizations. There's champions on this list that while they were defending their UFC belt were fighting in other organizations. It didn't used to be like how it is today. There was quite a bit of competition in terms of where you could go and make good money fighting, at least relative to the times. Now, speaking of legends, okay, next up in D tier is going to be Rich Franklin. All right. Now, I love Rich Franklin, especially much like the guys we spoke about earlier, a lot of nostalgia to his fights. Won the belt off of Evan Tanner, in 2005. Defended it twice before getting fucking murdered by Anderson Silva, who was brand new in the UFC. So, like, we see Kai Asakura getting a title shot immediately. We used to see that a little bit more. Now, Anderson didn't get one on his debut. He came in and destroyed Chris Lieben and then immediately was thrusted into a title shot. But that was because of what we spoke about with Mario Bustamante, the other competitors at the time. Like, if you had a guy that was absolutely running shit in Pride, they would bring him in and, you know, put him in championship level fights immediately. It was a great time to be a fight fan. Okay, Rich Franklin gave us a ton of incredible fights. Guy is tough as nails. I can't remember who it was against. It might have been Chuck Liddell, but he broke his arm mid-fight and just continued on. Like, the guy is an absolute savage. Okay, moving on to another middleweight champion, who is going to be Robert Whittaker. Now, this one might be a little bit of bias, okay? The reason because technically you could put him F tier, but let's go over it a little bit, okay? Some guys are kind of victims of circumstance that other fighters created, right? Whittaker won the interim title, and instead of getting to fight Michael Bisping, he had to sit out and wait for Bisping, who wanted to fight George St. Pierre. He was also promised a fight between the winner of that, right? So if George St. Pierre won, it was signed into his contract that he was supposed to stay and defend his title, which of course he never ended up doing. So Rob got kind of screwed in that sense. Didn't get to fight Bisping because Bisping lost, and didn't get to fight GSP because GSP just dipped the fuck out. So then he got promoted to Undisputed Champion. He had to fight Yoel Romero for a second time, who he won the interim title off of. It didn't even count as a title defense, okay? Because Yoel Romero missed weight, unfortunately. And I know there's a lot of people that think Romero won that fight. I think at best you can argue a draw. There was one 10-8 round in my opinion, but I think it's very easy to score 3 rounds for Robert Whittaker. That's besides the point. But then he goes on to get knocked out Todd Asanya, right? So technically no real title defenses. I just feel like the amount of guys he's beaten in that weight class and the fact that he kind of got screwed as a champion in the first place was why I put him here. But again, maybe a little bit of bias at play. Let us get to the next one, who is another middleweight champion, actually. Sean Strickland, okay? I understand Sean Strickland fans are going to be upset by this, but listen. He had 0 successful title defenses. Honestly, he could be F tier, right? He whooped Izzy for 5 rounds to get the belt, which was very impressive at the time, especially considering the only people we'd seen beat Izzy at that point was Jan Blachowicz by decision and Alex Pereira, who basically had to pull it out of his ass in the 5th round. You know, so to see somebody go out there, and Jan Blachowicz did this to a degree, but Israel Adesanya fans are unhinged and think for whatever fucking reason that he had to wrestle. But he, you know, either way, Sean Strickland goes out there, basically whoops him for 5 rounds, on the feet, all the rest of it, and then he loses a very controversial split decision to Dricus du Plessis in his first defense, which I do believe that he won, but it doesn't really matter. We're not here to argue that, Deadpool. Okay, moving on to the aforementioned Dricus du Plessis. Now, Dricus has a title defense, so he is actually, you know, legitimately in this tier. Over Israel Adesanya, of course, who he finished, which is a good win, although that win's kind of like lost its allure. You know, we've seen Alex Pereira finish him, we've seen Sean Strickland beat him, we've seen Jan Blachowicz beat him by the time Dricus got to him, but still, to finish him the way that he did was impressive. Now, if Dricus du Plessis goes on and beats Sean Strickland decisively in their rematch, I would probably put him higher up on this list, but as of right now, I think he is where he should be. Moving on, finally we get out of middleweight for a little bit, okay? We see Bilal Muhammad. Now, much like Merab, new champion, not going to punish him for it, so I'm not going to throw him in F tier, but I'm also not going to put him any higher because we have yet to see him defend. I do want to point out, though, I really appreciate the activity that we're already seeing from him. He's turning around in just a few months to take on Shavkat Rakhmonov, who is an absolute fucking monster. So if Bilal Muhammad goes out there and whoops Shavkat, no matter how unlikely you think that may be, I might actually put him a rank or 2 higher, okay? And I don't like Bilal. I'm trying to show my unbias here, all right? Now, moving on. Now, this next fighter, I'm sure a lot of you like, especially because he's got a podcast that a bunch of us listen to, and he's a funny personality. He gave us a lot of cool moments in and outside the octagon, right? Much like the guys we spoke about earlier, very nostalgic, and that is Rampage Jackson, okay? Now, you know, I really like Rampage, but unfortunately he only defended successfully one time. Although at the time, dude, knocking out Chuck Liddell the way he did for the belt was absolutely crazy. Chuck Liddell was basically fucking everybody up at that point in time. Okay. Now let's get to another guy at light heavyweight. Absolute legend. There are so many legends from light heavyweight. Okay, Lyoto Machida, who, by the way, this is another, in my opinion, display of my unbiasedness. Lyoto Machida was one of my favorite fighters. I had his Silver Star shirt, all the rest of it, the Yellow Dragon one, my favorite shirt I've ever owned, so much so that I sought it out as an adult to buy it again, okay? But one successful title defense, and then he lost it. But, you know, it is what it is, dude. He is a D-tier champion. Moving on to Jan Blachowicz. Okay, now, Jan Blachowicz, dude, Jan Blachowicz is so underrated, okay? He had one successful title defense. It was against Israel Adesanya, which, by the way, for Izzy fans, he beat him on the feet as well as in the grappling. But either way. And then he went on to get finished by Glover Teixeira. And also, there might be a little bit of an asterisk there, considering he took the belt off of, you know, Dominic Reyes, who was not the champion, although basically was, because he definitely did beat John Jones, okay? Either way, let's move on to the next fighter in D tier, and that is going to be Maurice Smith. Now, I would imagine most of you younger people are not going to know who he is. He beat Mark Coleman for the belt, defended it against Tank Abbott, which is impressive, especially at the time. Tank Abbott was an absolute fucking maniac, okay? It was in that same year as well. I want to point something out, dude. We don't see much of this anymore. In 1997, the year that he won the belt, Maurice Smith fought 5 fucking times, okay? Incredible levels of activity. Moving on to Kevin Randleman, all right? Now, again, like most of this tier, one successful defense. That was basically the theme of D tier. In 2000 against somebody you have probably heard Joe Rogan talk about, okay? People forget, man, Pedro Hazo, who, you know, either way. Good, you know, I like Kevin Randleman, but one successful title defense. Not much higher I can place him. All right, now we are at the home stretch for what is D tier, and then we can move on, and they get smaller as we go along. I'm going to try to speed things up just a little bit. Let's get to the next guy at D tier, and that is Tim Sylvia. Okay, he just went all over the place. I apologize for that. Either way, won the belt in 2003 off of Rico Rodriguez and defended once later that year to Gan McGee. I mean, listen, dude, a lot of these older champions, you're probably not going to know who it was they fought or what that means or anything like that, and that's fine. You know, but it was still difficult to become a UFC champion and obviously to defend it. Now he lost the following year to Frank Mir by armbar. And like I said, if you've not seen that, please go ahead and look that up. Okay, moving on. Junior Dos Santos is the next champion at D tier. Now, JDS knocked out Cain Velasquez for the title in 2001, which is insane in and of itself. Kind of like we spoke about with Fabricio Verdum. And then he knocked out Frank Mir for a title defense, only to lose to Cain Velasquez in 2013, and he never won the belt ever again. And the next time he fought for it, Cain fucking killed him, basically. Okay, Junior Dos Santos gave us incredible fights at light heavyweight, especially his trilogy with Cain Velasquez. Either way, we move on to a heavyweight. Some of you might be upset by this, but Francis Ngannou. Okay, Francis Ngannou is a D tier champion, and I'll tell you why. I get that he never lost the belt technically, but we know, you know, well, what we don't know what he could have done was what I was trying to say, right? Because he left. Now, obviously, knocking out Stipe the way that he did was very good, although it was kind of an older Stipe, but still. His first, okay, title defense was a little iffy as well, if we'll mention that, right? There is an argument, a legitimate argument, by the way, that he lost that fight based on actual scoring criteria, considering Cyril Gane was the one going for fight-ending moves. But either way, even if you think he won it, it's not like it aged all that well, right? Cyril Gane has not gone on to do anything spectacular. In fact, he showed us that he kind of folds and is a bit of a ducker because he refuses to fight Tom Aspinall. But either way, dude, let's move on. Ilia Topuria. Now, Ilia Topuria has the potential to be very highly ranked, right? He's a new champion, much like Merab, much like Bilal. I wasn't going to punish him and put him in F tier because he's not defended yet, but I also can't put him higher up as of right now. However, if he goes out there and starches Max Holloway, which I don't know that that'll happen, but I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, I might put him up in like B tier because that would be fucking insane to knock out Volkanovski. I understand he was probably not at his best, but to knock out Volkanovski for the title and then to go out and finish Max Holloway, I mean, Jesus. Fucking Christ, okay? Moving on. Zhang Weili. Now, some people might disagree with this one considering she has been, at least in terms of time, a very long reigning champion at strawweight, but I'm getting a bit fucking annoyed with that, okay? She fights once a year. That's unacceptable, okay? Also, her last 2 title defenses, I mean, listen, Yan Xiaonan's not a horrible title defense, but Amanda Lemos is not great. She's never been great. She won the belt off of Carla Esparza, who was not very good and is also old. And, you know, she's not fought some of the girls that I think could potentially actually give her troubles. Also, we've started to see her get a little bit more boring and safe as her title reign continues. But either way, dude, we're going to move on to Leon Edwards. Now, Leon, I think it's fair that Leon Edwards is here, okay? Because he did defend against Kamaru Usman, so the head kick wasn't just luck. Obviously, it was set up, beautiful head kick, perfect placement, all the rest of it. And then he comes back and he defends against Usman in a decision, which was good to see because it showed us that he's actually better than Usman rather than just landing a head kick in the last minute. So he one successful title defense before losing to Bilal. Two successful title defenses. However, that's the problem with Leon. Now, not only did I forget the Colby Covington defense for a brief moment there, I apologize for that. When I was making this list, I forgot him on it as a champion, period, okay? Because while I did enjoy the Usman fight, that Colby fight was absolute dog shit, and he basically did nothing against Bilal. So, you know, the Colby fight was shit. So shit, in fact, that I forgot about it only for a second. Okay, you can't fault me for it. I bet many of you did as well. Moving on to the last fighter in D tier. We are well over halfway, boys, okay? Andrei Arlovsky. Now, you know, one title defense against Buentello, who most of you, probably 90% of you, have not heard of. He was promoted after defending the interim title against Justin Eilers, who, you know, we're seeing a trend here. Tom Aspinall's not the only one to do it, but at the very least, he's the most recent one. But there's been a few guys that have had to defend interim titles for whatever fucking reason. Not necessarily, though, because the champion of that weight class is literally refusing to fight the contender for an old, washed-up man, okay? Either way, dude, now we finally get to C tier, all right? Thank God, we're getting there. All right, now we are kind of in the home stretch. These next 2 categories are half the size as the previous 2, and then they only get smaller from there. So let's get started right away with the first person at C tier. These next few might be a bit controversial, but I don't really care. Henry Cejudo. Okay, now I understand he's a double champ and all that stuff, but, you know, if he didn't leave for his prime years, he could have been way higher on this list, but the fact is that he did. Right? And out of the 2 belts that he held, he only defended the bantamweight title. Well, he defended the flyweight title against TJ Dillashaw. He defended bantamweight a single time against Dominic Cruz, who had been inactive for the last 4 years, off the couch, took it on short notice. TJ Dillashaw, you know, was withered away to essentially nothing and ended up popping for EPO anyways because he couldn't make the weight. It was a horrible decision on TJ's part, and obviously it's not Henry's fault that happened, but we'd never seen TJ just go down the way that he went down. So if he would have stayed throughout his, you know, prime years and defended the title a few more times, I would have put him much higher up on this list. But like I said, the Dominic Cruz one, I don't weigh very heavily. And the TJ Dillashaw one at flyweight, I don't weigh all that heavily either. If he had done a trilogy match with, you know, Demetrius Johnson and beat him a third time, or a second time rather, it would have been incredible. But either way, let's get to Dominic Cruz himself. Okay, this might be another controversial one. I get that he was like a long reigning, you know, if we factor in his WEC days, maybe he'd be higher up on the list, but I'm not doing that. We're talking about UFC only. So Dominic Cruz defended his belt in the UFC 3 times. Twice against Uriah Faber, who, like I pointed out earlier, lost to basically every single champion he ever fought. Uriah Faber, listen, man, he's just not really championship material. And then a very undersized Mighty Mouse, right? So, Dominic Cruz, unfortunately, was plagued with injuries and all the rest of it, and maybe if he had the opportunity to have more title defenses, then he would be higher up on this list. And if we were including WEC Dom, he would probably be higher up on this list as well. But either way, moving on to TJ Dillashaw. All these guys are intertwined in some which way, shape, or form, at least the first few. Won the Bantamweight Championship, defended it twice, lost it to Cruz in what was a pretty controversial decision, and then he won it back and defended it one more time against Cody Garbrandt. Eventually, like we spoke about with Cejudo, he popped for EPO at flyweight and had to vacate his Bantamweight Championship. It's really too bad that his career ended the way it did, because TJ Dillashaw was so fun to watch fight, man. He was so good in so many different aspects of the game. You would see him throw beautiful head kicks against Cody Garbrandt, right? He had this really odd striking style. And then you would see him against a absolute powerhouse like John Lineker, time takedowns like George St. Pierre-esque. So it's too bad that he did what he did. Either way, dude. Moving on to an absolute fucking legend, Frankie Edgar. Okay. A lot of people love Frankie, but I had to put him in C tier. He can't be higher up. Although I will point out, if we were going to put him higher up, it would be because Frankie Edgar was defending at a weight class that he should not have been in. Frankie Edgar was a very small lightweight and ended his career in bantamweight. If you're a younger fan, I understand you not getting Frankie Edgar being an absolute fucking legend, because you're going to remember him getting starched by Chris Gutierrez. But either way, he got 3 title defenses, although one of them was a draw, so it's not technically a defense, it's a retaining his title. And then he went on to knock out Gray Maynard in the rematch, which was good. But, you know, 3 title defenses, 2 kind of, but either way. That's what most of these guys in this ranking have. Moving on to Benson Henderson. Okay, I just moved him around a bunch. I apologize for that. Much like Frankie, he defended it 3 times. Eventually got submitted by Pettis and lost the belt. It seems like no lightweight can get past that 3rd title defense. That is a record set by BJ Penn, and it is yet to be broken. You know, it's been tied by a few people, but never broken. He defended against Frankie Edgar, Nate Diaz, who we know struggles with good wrestlers, and Gilbert Melendez. They're good wins, but like I said, Nate, not really championship material, and Frankie was very small, as I mentioned when we spoke about him. Okay, moving on. Now, this one's going to upset a few people. There's going to be fans of this guy that think he should be higher, and there's going to be people that can't stand him that think he should be lower because he's got no title defenses. Conor fucking McGregor, okay? Listen, dude. I understand. No title defenses. But I will point out he was the first guy to hold 2 belts in 2 different weight classes at the same time. We'd seen guys hold belts in multiple weight classes before, like BJ Penn, but never as they were champion in the lower weight class. Also, the fact that he starched Jose Aldo, who is very high up on this list, okay, spoiler, and then went on to have one of the maybe best performances, the best single performances of all time against Eddie Alvarez. The way that he did it also started a trend that, while I might be annoyed with it at times, because I would like to see champions defend in their own weight classes, if it wasn't for him doing that, we might not have seen Daniel Cormier go up to heavyweight and have a trilogy with Stipe. We might not have seen Henry Cejudo go up and, all this shit. So that's why he's in C tier. I'm not putting him lower. You can if you want to. Either way, let's move on to another absolute fucking legend who a lot of you younger fans won't know. Pat Miletich, okay? Now, he was the inaugural welterweight champion, meaning the very first one in the UFC. In 1998, he defended it 4 times while fighting in other organizations. This dude was doing entire fucking side quests, okay? And I'd imagine most of you don't know the people that he's beaten, so I'm not even going to bother going over them. But the fact that as the first champion ever, in an era when belts would change hands like fucking crazy, he was able to hold it for 4 title defenses and set a good precedent in that division, I think is absolutely noteworthy. Moving on to another welterweight champion, and that is Robbie Lawler, okay? Now, if this was like a title fight tier list, meaning like the most exciting title fights, Robbie would probably be at S tier. He gave us so many good fights, man. Defended it only twice, but one of them, Robbie against Rory McDonald, one of the best fights of all time, and then against Carlos Condit. And I understand, Maybe he should have lost the Condit fight, but either way, it was a fantastic fight. Also, he beat a juiced up Hendricks to get the belt in the first place, which I think is pretty damn impressive. Okay, moving on to the next person in C tier, which is another welterweight champion, Tyron Woodley. I bet you there's going to be some Tyron Woodley fans that are upset by this, but listen, man. In hindsight, I feel like you could put Tyron Woodley lower. 4 title defenses is impressive, like we just spoke about with Pat Miletich, but they were fucking stinkers for the most part. One of them was a draw, so it wasn't even technically a successful title defense. The Damian Maia might be one of the worst men's fights we've ever seen. It was up there with Yoel Romero and Israel Adesanya. I think it broke a record for least significant strikes thrown in a men's title fight, or in a men's fight period. Meaning there was less strikes thrown in a championship 5-round fight than there were in other 3-round fights that were just as fucking boring. Okay? Pretty bad. Now, he did go and destroy Till, but then he got dominated by Usman. All the while complaining about absolutely fucking everything, despite being placed on Conor McGregor cards where you have the opportunity to make a shit ton of money in pay-per-views. Okay? Moving on. Frank Shamrock. Okay? Frank Shamrock, dude. Legend. First light heavyweight champion. Defended it 4 times, most notably against Tito Ortiz. I'm not going to bother going over the other ones, but much like Pat Miletich, you know, set a good precedent, even though they may not have been over super well-known guys. We had a champion who came in and set a good example for how to, you know, maintain the title and defend your spot. All right, now we've just got 4 left. 4 C tier. So let's get to it. First guy that I've got out of this last bunch here is Brock Lesnar. Okay, now this might be nostalgia. There might be a little bit of bias here, and I'll just have you know, I am not a WWE fan, but what Brock Lesnar did, the excitement that he brought to the UFC in the heavyweight division at the time was pretty fucking crazy and pretty cool to watch, and gave us some pretty classic fights as well. Also, it's impressive that a guy who, I understand he had like a collegiate wrestling background and stuff like that, but was able to come in and do what he did in the UFC. I understand he's an absolute monster, and they basically let him do a bunch of steroids, but still, man, he beat some legends, right? And then also we, because of him, got the Cain Velasquez fight, which was incredible to see as well. So maybe it's just nostalgia that put him here, but he did defend his title against Carwin, and he finished Frank Mir before that as he avenged that loss as well, right? Frank Mir was his UFC debut and finished him. So he finished Randy for the belt, finished Frank Mir, and then Shane Carwin as well after that. Pretty impressive, you know, considering the lack of experience. And then he got absolutely washed by the next person in C tier, Cain Velasquez. Man, I wish we got more Prime Cain. This dude was an absolute fucking monster. Like I said, he beat Brock for the belt, finished him in the first round. Lost it to JDS, got it back a year later against JDS, defended it twice after that, giving us incredible fights, and then he lost to Verdum. And unfortunately, he's just been injury-plagued throughout his whole career. We've never got to see full potential Cain. And also, we keep hearing about, you know, Tom Aspinall and John Jones at heavyweight, and Francis Ngannou and John Jones at heavyweight, all this shit. It used to be Cain Velasquez and John, that was like the dream fight if John Jones was to move up and fight Cain Velasquez. Unfortunately, it never happened. Either way, moving on to Charles Oliveira. Now, I wish I could put Charles up higher on this list, but I can't, okay? Unfortunately, because of the fucking scales, I think it was in Phoenix, Arizona at UFC 274, but the run that Charles Oliveira went on to become champion was unlike most we have seen. An insane win streak. Absolutely crazy. Bunch of finishes. Just like terrifying, honestly. He came from out of nowhere. He was like a nobody. And then all of a sudden he finishes Michael Chandler. He finishes Dustin Poirier. He finishes Justin Gaethje. That was the fight that he had to vacate the title. And then he goes on to lose to Islam. So technically he only had 1 title defense. I counted as 2. But either way, dude. Do you know what I mean? This one might be a bit biased. You could probably put Charles lower if we're going by the objective criteria, but fuck it. It's my tier list. Moving on. Pantoja. This is another guy I might put lower if I was to rethink this again, okay? Because I do think that he lost to Steve Erceg, and if I'm going to be consistent and use that as a metric, you know, but technically he does have 2 title defenses so far. Although his one against Royval was pretty fucking boring. And, you know, I thought he lost to Steve Erceg, like I said, so not the most impressive title run, although it is nice to see a champion at flyweight be able to actually defend him. We don't get a quadrilogy, you know what I mean? So good for Pantoja, I guess. Okay, we're gonna get to B tier finally. Let's go. All right, now I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this is the most controversial tier by far. I have a feeling there's gonna be a bunch of different fan bases that are irritated with me. Okay, so let's get started right away with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Now, I understand she was like the longest reigning strawweight champion and all that good stuff, okay? But the problem is, dude, you know, a lot of people use the argument against Mighty Mouse level of competition and all that shit, but we have to factor that in when we're talking about women. We've had a few women that have been actually good at fighting, and the rest fucking suck. So while she defended the title 5 times, she was beating the shit out of chicks that have no technique whatsoever. Honestly, dude, this was back in the day, but this is still kind of the case. Okay, so let's move on, dude, to Valentina Shevchenko. I get it, man. First fighter to ever fill the belt of rubies. Has defended the title 7 times. Lost it to Alexa Grasso. Won it back just earlier this month. Or actually last month, my bad. Right, like I said, the first fighter, okay, to fill the belt with rubies. But again, man, she's fighting absolute fucking nobodies. Lauren Murphy, Jessica Ai, Caitlin Chookagian. You know, it's like I struggle as a viewer and somebody that has trained, I struggle to understand how a coach in a gym hitting, you know, holding mitts for somebody like a Jessica Ai or a, you know, a Lauren Murphy or a Caitlin Chookagian and being like, you know what, this chick's ready for the fucking big leagues, okay? Either way, moving on, Ronda Rousey. Okay, dude. It's okay, guys, chill. 7 title defenses, like the last 2, you know, but, like the last 2 against some girls who had no business being in championship level fights. Now, something I appreciate from Ronda was that she finished all of her defenses. All of her fights were by finish, right? But, you know, once she fought a girl that could actually stand with her and wasn't just utter shit in Holly Holm, she got head kicked. And then we saw Amanda Nunes come and she got absolutely brutalized, okay? And speaking of Amanda Nunes, I don't care, dude. You can be mad all you want. Now, she does have 8 title defenses in total, okay, across 2 different weight classes, losing her belt once to Juliana Pena. But her, maybe more than any of these girls, fought fucking nobody. She's got a few very good wins, right? Chris Cyborg being one of them, being basically the only one of them. We're talking Megan Anderson, Felicia Spencer, you know, fucking Irene Aldana standing there like a punching. I mean, what are we talking about here? Also, towards the end of her title reign, we got some pretty boring fucking fights, you know. But either way, moving on. This one's going to be controversial for a good chunk of the fan base. Max Holloway. Okay. In hindsight, dude, I'm a Max Holloway fan, but in hindsight, his title reign was not as good as I think a lot of people remember it being. He defended the belt 3 times. Once against Jose Aldo. Once against Brian Ortega. And once against Frankie Edgar. A pretty small Frankie Edgar, which, by the way, was a pretty lackluster fucking performance anyways. Like, he clearly won that fight. But it was not what I expected from... I don't know, man. It's just... I feel like a lot of us look back on his title reign with rose-tinted glasses, and when you go back and look at things more objectively, you know, it's not as crazy as a lot of people thought it was. It's just not A tier in my opinion. It just can't be A tier. But either way, he did give us some good moments. Okay, moving on. BJ Penn, another Hawaiian dude. There's going to be some people that are like, how the fuck is this guy up on this list? Right, but he won the welterweight title against Matt Hughes, okay? Then he went and fucked off to K1. Came back. He had a fight with Lyoto Machida at light heavyweight. And Renzo Gracie at light heavyweight. Then he went on to win the lightweight title. Yeah, light heavyweight to lightweight. A few years later. And defended it 3 times. Which is still a record that nobody's been able to break. Including Khabib Nurmagomedov, okay? He was so fucking good. And it's really sad that he went out the way he did. And that there's a large swath of the fan base that view him that way. But He's absolutely high up on this list. Moving on. Islam Makhachev may be the first man to actually break BJ Penn's streak if he was to defend against Arman Tsarukyan. And I think he will, right? Islam Makhachev, in my opinion, could end up being a very, like, you know, maybe even S tier, depending on how his career goes, because he doesn't seem to be wanting to fuck off the same way that Khabib did, right? As of right now, 3 title defenses. Finished 2 of them. Dustin Poirier and Volkanovski once. The first one was against Volkanovski as well. Now, that's like a slight on him, some people use, right? That he fought against featherweight, but Volk's one of the best ever, okay? And you know, it is what it is. We'll see him fight Arman Tsarukyan and all the rest of it, but I think he'll end up being quite high on this list. I think Islam Makhachev is already better than Khabib in terms of legacy and his resume and the people that he's beaten and all the rest of it. Moving on, Kamaru Usman. Dude, I told you this was going to be a very controversial tier, okay? Usman's reign was overrated. It just fucking was. Now, I appreciate the activity, right? 5 title defenses, but it was against 3 people. And like Usman fans love to point out, Colby Covington was undeserving. And not only that, dude, in the one where he was undeserving, the second opportunity, it should have been a draw, right? Masvidal wasn't deserving the second time either. Like, he was fighting good money fights, basically. But then once he fought a young contender in that division, he got head kicked, right? Again, I appreciate his activity, but he beat 3 guys in his title reign. I get it was 5 title defenses, but still. And the Colby fight should have been a draw, which would give us 4 successful title defenses. Okay, moving on. Chris Weidman. Now, there's going to be a lot of... Look, dude, I don't like Chris Weidman, especially after that eye-poke combination we've seen that he refuses to acknowledge, right? But he was a pretty good middleweight champion, okay? He had a healthy title reign. Beat Anderson back-to-back, and I understand the leg break was unfortunate, but it was due to a check. Defended his total 3 times, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the 3rd longest middleweight reign. So, pretty good, all things considered, from Chris Weidman. Moving on to the next fighter. Another underrated champion, to be quite honest, Tito Ortiz. Now, I understand that Tito Ortiz is basically retarded, okay? And should probably be studied for science sake. But he was a pretty good champion, man. He defended the belt 4 times, 4 of them being finishes. Eventually, he lost to Randy Couture, but, you know, it was in a weight class with, like we spoke about earlier, that the belt was kind of hot tomatoing for a while. So to get 5 title defenses at that point in time in the light heavyweight division is pretty fucking impressive, all things considered. All right, we have got 5 left for this tier. Let's get to them right away. The guy that beat Tito Ortiz, we just spoke about, Randy Couture. Okay, this guy, his UFC career is fucking insane. Listen to this, dude. I'll try to rattle through it quickly. Won the heavyweight championship. Then he vacated it due to contractual disputes. Won it again 3 years later. He defended it 2 times before losing it to Josh Barnett. Then he won the light heavyweight belt a year later. Or a year and a half later, pardon me. Lost it due to a doctor stoppage. And then he went and he got it back in the rematch against Vitor. Lost it to Chuck Liddell in his next title defense. And then he won the heavyweight belt again and defended that successfully once. This guy won the heavyweight belt 3 separate times and the light heavyweight belt twice. Fucking crazy, okay? With a few title defenses thrown in there as well. He deserves to be high up on this list, and that's why he is. Moving on to a guy that beat him, Chuck Liddell. Took the belt off Randy, like I just said, right? Defended it 4 times successfully, all by way of knockout. Tito and Randy included. Absolute, I loved watching Chuck Liddell. Absolute fucking savage. Just, dude, we need more strikers like him that worked a lot on their takedown defense so they could stand and fuck dudes up. It was amazing for a good long while until he got knocked out and then his chin went away. Moving on, Daniel Cormier in B tier. Daniel Cormier gets underappreciated, man. Okay, he just does. I understand he won the light heavyweight belt because John Jones was a fuck up, right? But he also went on to win the heavyweight belt on his own. So he was a good champion in terms of like being a good role model, not fucking up like John Jones, obviously. He won the vacant belt fighting Rumble, defended it twice successfully, lost to a roid-infused Jones, which made it a no contest, meaning he, you know, that fight just didn't happen officially, so he got his title back, and then he has to go defend it again after getting head kicked, you know, and he does successfully, and then he goes up in weight and knocks out Stipe. And then he also defended against Derek Lewis. So, DC is underappreciated in my opinion. Moving on to the guy that he knocked out at heavyweight, Stipe Miocic, okay? Still to this day, most title defenses at heavyweight. Defended it 3 times, 2 by knockout, once against Francis, who at the time was killing everybody, and Stipe just fucking sunned him. And then he went on to win it back against DC, right? And then he knocked him out with the body shot, or started off with the body shot, and then he beat him in a decision after that. Now, he did go on to get starched by Francis, but either way. Now, this might be the most controversial person in B tier, okay? Because his fans love to get upset about Khabib Nurmagomedov. Yes, he is in the same category as Islam and BJ Penn, and he should be. If he would have stuck around and defended against Charles Oliveira, he might be in A tier, but he didn't, okay? He didn't break the record for title defenses, and, you know, it's just, I mean, I don't know, man. It's just, listen, dude. Also, there's a bit of an asterisk, him winning the belt off Ally Quinton. Now, he did redeem it a little bit by beating Conor, who was the champ. But still, man, you know. And Poirier and Justin Gaethje's title defenses are very impressive, especially considering he finished them. But if he would have just had a defense or 2 more, he would absolutely be higher up on this list. Now, let's get to the A and S tier. Fucking finally, dude. I filmed this video yesterday. It was an hour and 40 minutes long. So I've been trying to make it a bit quicker, but it seems like it's not working all that much. Let's get to it. All right, now the first one in A tier is probably going to irritate some people, but we're going to talk about it, okay? John Jones. No, he's not in S tier, and I'm going to tell you why, okay? Too many asterisks on his record. He got stripped after his 8th title defense for hitting a pregnant lady with his vehicle, okay? A DUI and a hit and run to boot while injuring somebody, right? And then he came back, won the belt 2 years later, post USADA, by the way, right? And won, but was stripped for testing positive. Oh, wait, but by the way, in between those two, he was stripped a 3rd time for testing positive in the interim title fight before he fought for the title again against Ovens St. Preux. Then he comes back, right, and wins the belt and goes on to defend it a few more times. He takes it off of Gustafsson, wins against Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, and Dominic Reyes, which he lost to Dominic Reyes, but either way. Either way, dude, in each and every single one of those fights, he tested positive. So you could argue, pre-USADA, well, whatever, a lot of John Jones's competitors were probably on shit as well. Problem is, though, post-USADA, he was the only one testing positive constantly. Okay, so that's the problem I have here. I can't put him in S tier because of it. That's just a personal thing. If you have him in S tier, I don't give a fuck. But in terms of being a champion, right, you need to be a consistent person who is, like, you know, defending and whatever. But when you're constantly getting stripped and then the division gets held up and has to wait for you and you come back and all the fucking rest of it, you're not an S tier champion, okay? Moving on. Jose Aldo. Absolute fucking legend. Absolute legend. If we include the WEC days, this dude's S tier, right? But I'm talking UFC only. Defended his title 7 times, 2 of them being finishes. Obviously, he went on to lose it to Conor McGregor, but if we think about how long he reigned over featherweight in general, it's pretty fucking incredible, and he set a good example, and we saw this aside from Conor McGregor. The featherweight division has had almost exclusively long reigning champions, okay? Moving on to the 3rd person in this list, another featherweight champion. There's going to be people upset that I put Volkanovski over Holloway, but he should be, okay? He's got 2 more title defenses than him with 5. Taking the belt off of Max Holloway, beat him 3 times, right? A guy who has only ever lost to Conor McGregor at featherweight. The 3rd fight was very dominant. The 1st fight was not even close. It just wasn't, you know, he didn't beat the shit out of him or anything. In the 3rd fight he did, though. And yes, Max fans, Volkanovski won the 2nd fight. It was close, but he still won it, right? And then he goes on to get finishes in his title defenses. The decisions that he won against Brian Ortega were completely fucking dominant. Right, finish Yair Rodriguez after losing the 1st fight to Islam Makhachev. Dude, Volkanovski was so active as a champion that he was able to go off and do side quests and wait for the division to catch up to him so he had a new challenger. It was amazing. His title reign was fucking incredible. Moving on, Matt Hughes. I understand he's a bit of a piece of shit, okay, at the very least as admitted by himself in his own book. But either way, he defended the welterweight title 5 times before losing it to BJ Penn. Who, again, listen, there's no knock on that. I get that a lot of you young fans are going to be like, what the fuck? But still, that's okay to lose to BJ Penn at that point in time, okay? And then he won his belt back against George St. Pierre and defended it 3 more times. Well, technically twice. Joe Riggs missed weight, so it doesn't count as a title defense, but he was still winning as the champion. So 7 official title defenses if you count both his reigns, losing to, at the time, at this UFC run, to only BJ Penn and George St. Pierre, which is, obviously very good. Moving on. Israel Adesanya. Look, dude, I don't like him either. This is a testament. This is a good display of me being unbiased, okay? I don't like him, right? But I have to keep it objective and stick to my criteria. So he has to be here. He was active as fuck. 5 successful title defenses before he lost to Alex Pereira. Came back, flatline KO'd Alex Pereira to get his belt back. Now, he did go lose it very quickly after that to Sean Strickland, but still, man. 7 successful title fights, 5 title defenses, very active. And, you could point out a few of his fights being really shitty, right? Like the Romero fight, the Cannonier fight, the Vettori fight. You could even point to the fact that he should have probably lost the second Rob fight. There's another thing you could point to, because I'm sure Izzy fans would put Izzy in S tier, but, he did grow a boob, which is odd. Although he never tested positive, but it's still like, listen, bro, I can fucking see. Do you know what I mean? Either way, moving on. Speaking of, Alex Pereira wins the middleweight belt over the aforementioned Israel Adesanya, who at the time was a long reigning champion. Loses the belt in his first title defense, but then he moves up in weight, where he has been running shit ever since. He gets a win over Jan Blachowicz to get into a title fight, who was a champion, by the way. Beat Yuri Prochazka, who was the champion that never lost his belt, and then he goes on to defend it 3 times in 175 days, and quite frankly saved 2024 for the UFC. I mean, this guy. And also, if he goes on to beat Magomed Ankalaev or Nikita Krylov, or if Alexander Rakic manages to beat Magomed, he goes on to defend against these people, he could be S tier, within the next year or 2. So we will see. But let's get to that S tier. And if you have been paying attention and been using, the process of elimination, you probably figured it out by now, but let's get to it either way. Now, like I said, you've probably already figured it out, but we have to make it official, okay? So let us get to the first fighter in S tier, and that is going to be Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, okay? I'm so sick of hearing the, bullshit fucking, oh, well, what about the level of competition? Dude, he fought everybody they put in front of him, and he fucking killed them all, basically. He had a few tough fights, but hey, man, like we saw UFC 307 with Alex Pereira, Khalil Roundtree, sometimes the guys you don't expect end up being the ones that cause you problems, right? Like Tim Elliott, for instance. But the things that he did to these people, right, is incredible. So that's that. And also, 11 title defenses, 7 of them being finishes, no controversies, no failed drug tests, lost his belt in a controversial split decision, right? A fight that you could argue he won. He never got the opportunity for a trilogy despite killing Henry Cejudo in the first meeting. So I don't care about people that, talk about his level of competition. He deserves to be in S tier. He is the fucking epitome of a champion, okay? Just like this next guy. And yes, I'm Canadian, but it doesn't matter, dude. George St. Pierre. Absolute fucking legend, and much like Mighty Mouse, the epitome of a champion. Took the belt off of Matt Hughes, who was a very accomplished champion in his own right, like we spoke about in A tier. He was the guy at welterweight for a good long while, and he did so by head kick. Okay, then he loses his title to Matt Serra, fuck you. Wins 2 fights and gets his rematch, and absolutely destroys the guy that took it from him, right? Went on to defend 9 times against every single person available. Went on to take the middleweight championship belt off Michael Bisping 4 years later. No failed drug tests, despite what a lot of people accuse him of. And he avenged the only 2 losses he had on his record. George St. Pierre is an S tier champion. And you probably, there's only one guy left, okay? Anderson Silva. Holy shit, we did it. All 100 champions. Jesus Christ, okay? Defended his belt 10 times, all while doing side quests, most of which happened at light heavyweight. 8 of those title defenses were finishes, and he won the title with a finish as well, right? Now, he did have some controversy in terms of drug tests later on, But that was not throughout his reign, because his entire title reign was pre-USADA. Meaning, while he might have been on it, so was everybody he was fighting. Okay? He had fighters that tested positive after he beat them, which at that time to test positive was very hard to do, which means he was fighting dudes that were absolutely fucking juiced. Okay, he didn't test positive until the Nick Diaz fight, pardon me, which, like I said, he was no longer the champion for anyways. Now, this took me a very long time to put together, okay? I'm hoping I didn't miss anybody. I was able to shave a few minutes off of my initial recording, which is good enough, I fucking guess, okay? I apologize for the length of this video, but I wanted to do it because, oh, I thought it would be a cool idea, and I haven't seen anybody else do it, so, you know, it is what it is. If you like this style of video, let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that good shit, like I said in the beginning. I will see you at the next video. Okay, goodbye.